Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Legacy Project monthly webinar. I am Dan Scott. With me, as always, is Chad Reyes. Quick recap. The Legacy Project is, what we have called a movement that we're trying to put together to usher in a sort of new era of planning away from traditional estate planning and into a more legacy minded planning approach. Our goals here have been what we refer to and what you see as the 3 C's. Those are our 3 pillars: community, conversation, and collaboration. The intention here is to create a community of like-minded, legacy-minded professionals from various disciplines to engage in meaningful conversation around legacy planning and what that looks like from an industry perspective, as well as best practices, so that we can share what each of us does effectively and make those practices more sort of standard across disciplines and across the country. And finally, collaboration, to come here with a philosophy and a mindset that success takes a team, and we want to instill in everybody a collaborative effort to work together in servicing clients so that we can achieve the best results. Very quickly, we have a YouTube channel set up so that these webinars, these monthly webinars, are recorded and are available on our YouTube channel. I guess if you just put in the Legacy Project. Chad, is that correct?
Yeah, if they put in the Legacy Project, they put my name or your name, it'll come up because there's a few different legacy projects.
Right. So that's us with the 3 bars in the green, and we've been doing this since May, or April.
April.
So it's been a while. And lastly, before we get going, just a reminder: this is intended to be a conversation. So please, you can raise your hand in the messaging box. If you have a question, we definitely want to hear from you. We want your thoughts. We want your feedback. We want to be engaged. So don't be shy and raise your hand in the comments so we'll call on you for your questions. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Chad. Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So excited to be with you guys today. This legacy project that we've been doing and really getting some momentum. I don't know how much you know about it, but we've had a few thousand people that have attended one or multiple parts of our legacy project conversation series. Our first one, we had about 800 people, 800 advisors who registered for that event. So it's really exciting to just kind of see a movement where people are realizing that as advisors, we have to get beyond just the numbers. And what Dan and I consistently are hearing is this: we're hearing that I love the conversation, but how do you do it? And we get emails after, and they say the conversation's great, but can you show me some practical tools? So today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to share with you a process that we've created, and I would encourage you to create one similar for your own. One of the things that you're going to know about Dan and I and my wife and our organizations is that the purpose of doing the Legacy Project is not so that we keep all the data and you guys don't. It's so that you can use some of the stuff that we have and feel free to create your own. So this is what we call our 4 phases of generational wealth. And I want to walk you through the conversation. At any point, raise your hand. Any point, text in your question, and our team will stop us. And the goal really is more than anything. The goal is to be able to engage you in a conversation, because what I want and my heart is to empower the advisor to be able to have more deeper, more effective conversations with their clients. And this is something that we've been working on. My wife and I started this thought process around legacy probably about 11 years ago, and it's been a refining process over the years. So I hope that as you're hearing this, don't think that you got to get it right. You have to nail it. It has to be perfect, because it wasn't perfect and it still isn't perfect. But I want to share with you a conversation that we use. We have this conversation with every client. Doesn't matter what
Okay,
type of
Chad,
client. Yep.
yeah, I just want to clarify because when you said that, this is something we've created, this isn't something that the Legacy Project has just created. This is something that Chad has, and Daniel created in their business and have been implementing for some time.
Correct.
So it's a proven methodology that they use and he uses with clients.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for the clarity on that. Yeah, so it's something that at our business we've been using, and whether you're an attorney, a financial advisor, a life insurance advisor, an accountant, this is it's a chassis, and the ability to have a conversation and let a client know where they're at. So I'm just going to walk you through the conversation. At any point, jump in, and Dan and I are just going to discuss it. So phase one is what we call product purchases, and a lot of times, no matter where your clients are, whether your clients, have a million, couple 100,000, or if they're billionaires, every client at some point or another starts with phase one, which is product purchases. It's where you buy a product, you bought a policy, you bought a trust, you created the trust, you bought a home, you started a business, whatever it may be, some form of financial product happened, the purchase of that happened in phase one. And then what happens is that if you look at the confidence line, that's right here, this confidence line, the confidence line is low because usually when someone buys just a product and they don't really know how it all integrates, their confidence is not as high as when they start moving up to phase two. And this is where I talk about, and our company talks about, where we integrate, and we make sure that the decisions were all made, and we call that the protection first philosophy planning. And it's where, all of their auto, home, umbrella is done correctly. All of their estate planning documents, their legal documents, their buy-sell planning is all done correctly, right? Their life insurance, their disability, it's all done correctly. And most advisors do a good job in phase one and two. But phase three and phase four is where I see there's a separation in advisors. And I've been doing this now for nearly almost 2 decades. And I really look at how advisors serve the families that they work with. And I see a breakdown in phase three, and I see very few advisors operating in phase four, which is partially why Dan and I said, how do we create this conversation around legacy to be able to empower advisors to want to have these conversations? So phase three is where you take your decisions, your integration, the collaboration of advisors, and the coordination of their decisions, and how do we bring them all together? And a lot of the times, this is where you find the idiots, split dollar transactions, captive insurance company implementation, some of the asset swaps and basis swaps. A lot of the sophisticated planning occurs in phase three, and clients, at least from my experience, clients traditionally think that once they've done that, their planning's done. And my wife and I in our organization say, well, actually, you're just beginning, because then we move to phase four, what we call love planning. Now, I'm sharing with you our process, not because our process is perfect, not because I want you to do business with us. I'm sharing with you our process so that if you've been struggling with trying to say, how do I integrate legacy into my model? This is what's been working for us. Feel free to deduct it, feel free to change it, feel free to do things that work for you, but at least you'll have some guidance of how you can do it. So phase four is what we call love planning. It's called leaving others valuable experience planning. And it's all about empowering the generation. So if you look on the bottom here, you see phase one, two, and three is preparing the asset for the family. How do we have the most tax efficient asset? How do we have the best strategies? How do we buy the best insurance? How do we hire the best wealth managers? That all is phase one, two, and three. But phase four is a whole different ball game. Phase four is how do we prepare the family for the asset? And you probably have heard Dan and I share this multiple times, and Dan, jump in at any point, that most families, studies have shown that most of the wealth, 70% of the wealth doesn't make it to the second generation. 97% of the wealth doesn't make it to the third generation, and 99% of the wealth doesn't make it to the fourth generation. well, I'm sorry, I messed the statistics up. 90% of the wealth don't make it to the third, 97% doesn't make it to the fourth, and then 99% of it doesn't make it to fifth and beyond. But the statistics show that very clearly there are 3 reasons why: breakdown in communication, breakdown in trust, failure to prepare the next generation. So we designed this 4 phases of generational wealth to address those issues. How do we address breakdown in communication? How do we address breakdown in trust? How do we address preparing the next generation? And that's what you see here on the love planning, which is the 4th phase, which is really where I think most families should hope to get to when they're talking about legacy planning.
And Chad, I like to add in, I mean, it's sort of involved in those reasons that came out of the study, but I sort of summarize often that the real reason behind wealth being made and lost in 3 generations is the lack of purpose that's built into the planning, right? And so that's and purpose, legacy to me equals purpose. When you ask someone what is their legacy, it is really a reflection on what their life meant, what their purpose was. To define that in advance, to proactively create that legacy is legacy planning. And the reason I say purpose, without purpose, there is no direction given to the asset. And any economist will tell you that the value of a dollar, the value of an asset, really comes from its application. It comes from the purpose and the direction that you give it. So what I find, and families seem to understand this, is without identifying very clearly and implementing a structure that protects the purpose of the assets, the financial assets, that's where they get pulled in different directions. They get argued over. There's litigation. There's all of the things that the breakdown in communication and those elements feed off of. But it's really essentially pulling the assets apart because you don't have that direction.
Yeah, and I mean, dead on point. I think as I think back with all the families that we work with over the years, and I think Dan and I think you and everyone on the call would agree, is the reason why they're sitting down with an advisor is because they want something better, right? What better is, the client may not even know, but that's part of what the advisor's role is to be able to show them or be able to guide them in something that can perform better for their family, whatever that better means. And one of the things that I've seen is this area right here, the ego barrier. This ego barrier, we calling it edging greatness out barrier. It's the struggle all of us have as advisors. Think about this. I don't have the time. I'm dealing with that with clients now as they want to get stuff done for the end of the year. I don't have the time. I have this going on. I'm being pulled in every direction. It's real, but these are the barriers that we as advisors have to get through to be able to serve this family at the next level. And breakdown in communication amongst the advisors. So many times you see advisors on different pages, different philosophies. And as advisors who want to serve families from a legacy perspective, I think these are the things we have to address. So we've utilized this just as a conversation with families. Like I said, feel free to change it up, make it yours, build it into your model. But it'll give you a discussion with the clients that you're serving, so at least they realize that there's more to planning than just phase 3. And phase 3 is fun for those technical advisors. For many years our practice was all around technical, and we still are a very technically driven practice, but we have a whole legacy side of it too, knowing that it's when the 2 of them meet is where the power happens. And I've heard it said that there's a big difference between good intentions and intentionally good. So a lot of families have good intentions, a lot of advisors have good intentions, but being intentionally good is very, very different. And I want to encourage you to choose to be intentionally good with the families you're serving. Build a model, build something around what you're doing to be able to serve them. But I'm going to jump in further into some of the things that we're doing. And I don't know, is there any questions? I don't know if there's any questions on the back end. No?
Hi, everyone. No, not yet.
Okay, good. Okay, perfect.
Or any hands raised.
Yep. All righty.
Hey,
So
Chad, before you move forward, I just want to, point out one thought I had on the prior graph, and it's something that I think is probably a challenge depending on whether you're a wealth advisor or somebody in insurance or an accountant or a lawyer. But, when we talk about going through the steps and product purchases, the one thing you need to be somewhat careful of is when those early stages result in irrevocable structures, right? So oftentimes, whether it's a trust or something, particularly trusts,
yep,
to get into the purposeful planning aspect of it, stage 4, you need to have the flexibility within the plan that you created to build that in.
correct.
It's easy when you have so for me, the way that this often, um, putting on the estate lawyer hat for a minute, the product purchase, would be somebody who's looking for a will, or if it's more complex, a will with a revocable trust, a pour over trust, and those are great starting points because everyone needs to have some protection for what happens on death, and it's something that most people understand, and that's an easy product purchase because you can change it at any point, right? So you can get that out of the way and you can build that trust with
Hmm.
that sort of a document. But when you get into, one of the first um, very common irrevocable trusts would be like a life insurance trust. And so, once you start getting into irrevocable trust territory, I find, and it's not always successful because, again, clients that aren't necessarily mentally there. But yeah, I usually try to raise the issue of, you know, what we're doing longer term, bigger picture here, because this
Right.
is an irrevocable trust. And so maybe you're setting it up because, you want to shelter the death benefit from estate taxes and things. Um, you can't change it once it's set up. And so how do we maintain the flexibility to build in some intentionality and legacy planning, or use that as a vehicle within a broader legacy plan later?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really, really valid point. A lot of the times when you're doing some of this more advanced planning, it's advanced from a technical, but not integrating some of this purposeful stuff into in legacy. You know,
Right.
so I'm gonna jump in and just keep on sharing. And like I said, today's purpose is really to give you guys give you the ability to say, listen, you're doing some of these things in this area and just glean from it. And there may be things that you're doing in your practice that are even better. I'd love to hear what you're doing on your end and share, because the purpose of this is to make us better practitioners, better advisors, so we could serve families at a higher level. But as we go from value, as we go back for 1 second, I'm gonna go back to that slide, and we're here now, and we're at values. When we're at values, now we go, what's the purpose of values? What's the purpose of this part of that planning? And it's all about improving communication, because I mentioned to you earlier, breakdown of communication and trust are major issues in families. And if we're not addressing it, and you may not be able to address it, or you may not have someone on the team who could address it, but then find someone who can. But those are issues that almost every family that I've worked with has had. Some are worse, some have less issues in it, but all of them, if you think of the best families you know, they still have issues at times with communication. So improving communication is one big part of this process. The second is identifying mission, competency, and style of each family member. And I'm going to go a little bit further into this. And then identifying the shared family core values. So check this out. So in this area, we talk about mission, competency, and style. What interests them? What interests that family member? What are they good at? What personality traits and behaviors, and how do they express themselves? And one of the things that we like to express is that there's a convergence, and this is within the area where that family member shines, and that's right here, this little area right here. That area is where their mission, their passion, their competency, what they're good at, and their style, how they behave, it shows up. So I'm going to show you another graph right now, because what we do in this part of the process is we have families complete these. because you get to see then what they're passionate about, what they're good at, and how they behave, mission, competency, and style. So if you're looking at this just quickly, and you have someone in the family or in the family business, this would show that that person is very good at theoretical discovery, meaning being able to go into data, pull out information from data so that you can apply it to make some really good decisions. Now, this wouldn't be the person that we want to put in front of the family to encourage them and move them forward. So what's awesome about using assessments, and this just happens to be the assessment we utilize, which, I mean, we've done our due diligence and think it's one of the better ones, but there are many assessments out there. But the part of Values 360 is who are the family members? What's important to them? Who are they? How do they operate? How do they function? And part of addressing the breakdown in communication is being able to recognize this stuff when you're working with those families. You know, when I'm sitting down with a family and I see that the entrepreneurial challenge, which is, you know, being a high-level entrepreneur, is high for the founder, but the children that are coming in, they're not. But that owner is putting that on that child. That child may not be ready for that. That child may be a great CFO, but maybe not the vision behind the company. So this helps give perspective. It also helps increase the chances of that family's wealth being there for generations, and or being able to utilize that wealth to separate it, like some of the things that Dan talks about, to separate the wealth so that people can find their fulfillment in what they're doing, and that they can use their wealth, but their wealth is going to be created in their area of strength, not in the area of weakness. So I don't know if you want to share anything on that, Dan.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned it because I was going to jump in on that point. Anyway, you know, I think it's very important to distinguish between the individual and the family when you talk about legacy, because, you know, let's say you are the founder of a company, of a business. You know, I think too often we jump to the idea of a family business or a family-owned business. And the reality is that that business is a reflection of the individual who built it, and that's very much part of their legacy. The goal, you know, I don't know if this is a universal truth, but the goal, at least, you know, for me in legacy planning, is that the legacy of one individual, what they accomplished, it's not to continue to hand that off to a family member necessarily. It's more to use that as a you know, a springboard for each other individual family member to find and achieve their own purpose and legacy. Sometimes they cross over, right? Sometimes there's somebody in the family who shares the values and the vision and can take over the company, but more often than not, I think that is not the case. And one of the most common mistakes that we make is that we perceive, you know, a business as a family enterprise. The family as an enterprise is different, right? So if you are, I like using Steve Jobs as an example, assuming Apple was not a public company, but, you know, if Apple were privately owned by Steve Jobs, you know, that's his personal, would have been his personal legacy. To make that necessarily into a family-run company does not ordinarily make sense. Whereas what you would want to do is ensure that, you know, that company, Apple, were put in a structure that could, you know, preserve it perpetually, allow it to continue to serve its purpose and thrive as a company, right? So that's all the governance that you're built into it, and that it can benefit financially the family and serve as a you know, a tool for others to achieve their own individual legacies. But to necessarily just throw the family into the ownership of that and the control of that doesn't make sense, because they won't necessarily understand the company.
Yep.
Which, you know, and companies, when you're building real functioning commercial companies, as opposed to just like a holding investment company or something, you know, they serve a purpose. And you know, when you build a brand, you build a company, it's about instilling those values and building that from the foundation up. So protecting and preserving is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I think to your point,
Assessments, yeah, to your point, these assessments, while it can work within a family enterprise structure, they can also be used just to identify where that individual should be going in their own personal life so that they can live a happy, fulfilled existence.
Yep. Yeah.
Now,
And go ahead,
again,
Daniel.
we have a question that came in. I'd like to open up Barry's microphone.
Yep.
You're going to hear an unmute. Barry, please join us. You may have to unmute it on your end.
Hi, thanks.
Hey.
Hi,
How are you?
very interesting. I just have two questions. Basically, the first one is, obviously, we're talking about family, and that I guess includes everyone who's listed as a beneficiary in any documents or something. First question is, some are going to be minor children who haven't developed their missions and competencies, but some are adults. How do we, bifurcate them? And the second one is, if it's a large extended family and everyone can't be part of the meeting or the assessments, how do we deal with some that complete and some don't? So that's basically the question. It's just ideas. I know there's no one answer, but
no, I appreciate that. So the first thing I would say, Barry, is that when you're looking at children, right, depending on the age, so if you have a child that's, let's say, 12 or 13 or older, then we would use this assessment because they have a or any assessment, they have a youth assessment, right? That helps, rather than talk about it through a business lens, it talks about it through a career lens, but it's all around the same data, right? The second thing is, if you have a younger child, right, I would say that obviously we can't have a 4-year-old complete an assessment, but one thing that I've done personally, and my wife and I, is when I look, we have 20 nieces and nephews, right? So my wife and I have 20 nieces and nephews. We don't have any children yet, but every one of our nieces and nephews are very, very different, and we deeply love and care for them all. But we recognize these characteristic traits in them at a very young age. So like, I have a nephew of mine, he's 11 years old now, but since 4 years old, I've been kind of mentoring him because I recognize that he's a salesperson. If he believes in something, he's going to sell you to the end. So you can recognize some of these characteristic traits, obviously, in children without them taking the test. You could see if someone's very good with encouraging, and then obviously if they're encouraging, they're typically higher on the motivational energy, or if they're really good with numbers and going in and looking for data, they're good in theoretical discovery, right? Or if you see they always want to help people, probably high in human development. So you could recognize the traits without the assessment, but once you're able to do an assessment for, typically I would say 12 or older, it would help clarify it for the family. Secondly is across the family line, no matter where they are globally, right? This can be completed and then compiled on an online platform so that they can be able to see family-wise, depending on the family obviously wanting to share this. And we're assuming that the family that would engage in this type of conversation wants that. But they would bring all of the different family members together. And what happens is you get a report that shows all the different characteristics of the family, who are high in this one area, who are not high in that area. So that as a family now, you start embracing the uniqueness of each one instead of looking at the faults. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's perfect. Thank you. I was just looking for ideas. That's perfect.
Yep. Thank you, Barry. All right. So
thank you, Barry.
The one thing I'll just add to that, Chad, around the family and minor children, as I think that if when you do this correctly, it very just quickly becomes an ongoing dialogue around sort of parenting and who's in charge of those minor children, and this takes on a sort of philosophy when it comes to how you deal with minor children. So these conversations kind of organically develop. I've got kids and they're very young, and I don't hesitate to talk about purpose, with them. It's just something that becomes a mindset. And as they grow older, then they, are slowly introduced, and this is where advisors and things can help the parents of those minor children about when to have certain conversations, or hey, here's a good book to read, right? There's a great book somebody recommended to me How to Raise Financially Fit Kids, which kind of really lays out, at what ages how to speak to kids about money and teach them, responsibility around those things. So, it becomes, coming back to that team and collaboration, legacy planning is really an ongoing process, and it's the role of the advisors becomes, helping the parent along in terms of ushering the minor child into the process.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a client that we recently worked with, and they had children that were, I think they were 18 and 20, somewhere around there. And you could see that that family was a little bit hesitant to be able to bring the kids into the conversation. But once they did, it was so relieving, because the family was able to start joking around it and say, oh, we saw that in you when you were a kid. And it just became very enjoyable. And it turned into instead of it being a scrutinizing thing, it turned into something that the family really embraced. And that's the hope of it. It's not to point out the weaknesses as much as to really focus on the strengths of that person, so that the family can really say, let's get behind the strengths of our child, so we can put them in the best spot for in life, or we can make sure that they're in the right position within the family business if they are in the family business. And then I'll jump into, go ahead.
Well, and just the other thing on that, Chad, is when you start talking about young adults, again, a lot of this really comes back to sort of mindset and trying to help clients with mindset, because, too often, and this goes, Chad, to the point you made earlier, clients want to be done and have a plan and sort of have answers, right, that are final. And I think it's important to stress that when it comes to legacy, this is a living, ongoing, organic thing. And so when young adults are beginning to figure out what they want to do in life, they don't necessarily have to figure it out right away, and that it is a journey for them. And so part of this is helping them live that in a very intentional way, and they're going to change their mind or make mistakes and things, and all of that is okay. That we don't need a final answer when you're 21 and graduating college or something. It's a matter of making sure that you're putting your best effort into being purposeful and developing, that young adult's legacy.
Yeah, I think we're all trying to figure it out. It's, I don't think anyone's arrived in that area. I think, though, that some people are just evolved more in it, and these are what we've seen successful families do and how we've helped them. So I'm going to jump to the next part here. Is, so when we're looking at core values, and the reason why I'm sharing this, guys, so we're on the same page, is just to give you ideas of what you can do in your practice. Because if you're having these conversations with your clients, I believe you're going to wind up being more valuable to them, because these are some of the things that they're really thinking about. So this is, we give them the ability to choose 52 cards. It's from a friend of ours that we've had on here. He has a deck of cards. His name's Richard Orlando, but he has a deck of cards that are value cards, and these are the 52 values. Now, this is a hypothetical family, but this family said that an up-to-date estate plan aligned with values is important to them. Little or no financial debt, succession plan for the family business, financial security. So they pick the 10 values that are most important to them. And we've done this with families, husband and wife. So husband chooses his, wife chooses his, children choose theirs depending on their ages. And then you bring it together and you say, wow, look, we have some very clear values that we all are in agreement on. We agree on this, preparing the next generation. All of us believe that that's important. All of us believe that a succession plan for the family business is important. All of us believe that little debt is important. So now the family starts recognizing what are the things that we're in agreement on. Remember, wealth doesn't get to the second, third, or fourth generation due to the statistics I shared earlier, because of breakdown in communication, breakdown in trust, failure to prepare the next generation. This is all what we're doing, is addressing those three major issues. So I'm going to jump into the next part. And if anyone has questions or anyone wants further details, feel free to email us, give us a call. And we've done that with multiple people that have said, I really liked what you shared. Can you share a little bit further? Call us. We're happy to share. The purpose of this movement is not for us to to take all of it and keep it inside. It's to be able to give it to the advisors to reach the families that they serve. There's no coaching program. We're not looking to, all we're looking to do is start a movement that families can be served at at the next level of planning. And whatever we can do to help, let us know. So we go into the next part of it is gratitude. So gratitude, we talk about with the family is it's creating an attitude of gratitude culture. It's a culture of that family being grateful for what they have, whether they have $1 or they have billions. Giving opportunities, where as a family, where are the giving opportunities? Where can we give to? Who could we give to? How can we get behind something that we all agree in to make an impact? If the families that you're working with, some of the families we're working with, well, many of the families we work with have pretty significant means. Well, what do we want to give back to? Where do we want to, as a family, put some resources? And then how do we measure the impact of what we're giving? You see, one thing is to give, but how do we measure what we're giving so that we can make sure we're being good stewards of what we've been given?
Chad, do you find, gratitude is something I can't say I speak directly to like you do in this process?
Yep.
Do you find that there's some resistance? I mean, and I don't want to generalize clients, but certainly kind of older school business clients, I'm thinking like my father's generation, would hear the word gratitude and kind of see it as, fluff or, new agey or something like that. Can you speak to maybe how you address that or how you field that issue?
Yes, some of them do. And what I've seen over the years, Dan, is if you're competent in what you do technically, you've earned the right to speak into their life legacy. Got it? So technically, we built a practice that is very sophisticated technical practice, right? So they realize the level of value we can bring to the family. And then when I tell them, well, I understand that the next part of the planning is uncomfortable. It's not something you're used to. And we don't have to jump in and just totally jump in. We can take little bits and pieces of it. But what I've seen is when the family starts doing little bits and pieces and they start seeing and getting momentum and they're saying, wow, I didn't realize how this works with communication with my family. It's working better. All of a sudden now they're like, all right, I'm open to these conversations, hence gratitude that I typically wouldn't have been open to maybe a year ago. So I think part of it as advisors is not to get them to do everything, just to get them to move a little bit closer towards building a legacy plan. And as they taste it and as they experience it and as they can say, wow, this felt good, they're willing to take that next step. And think about this. When you and I get in the car, we jump in our car, the headlights go 300 feet ahead of us. We don't need to see the whole trip for 3 hours. We just need to see 300 feet. And that's kind of the viewpoint I take with families with legacy. If I can get them to see 300 feet ahead of them, when we get to 300 feet further, they'll be able to see further from there. So I'm going to jump into the next part. I just want to kind of share it with you guys, and then, any questions, feel free. Legacy. Legacy now. How do we talk about legacy? Family legacy statement. What is the family legacy? What is the individual legacy? How do we prepare the next generation? All of that happens in this area. How do we bring the family together to intentionally prepare the next generation? And then in legacy, how do we, and this is to Dan's point, what he shared earlier, how do we integrate the values? How do we integrate our existing planning decisions so that they line up? How do we take technical planning, our values and purpose, and how do we bring them together? And to Dan's point, sometimes we got to be very careful that the things we set up doesn't stop and hurt what we're trying to accomplish from a value standpoint. But when you're able to do it in a format or a structure similar to this, you really do get to align values and assets. And then the last part, governance. And Dan, you talk a lot about this, but what's the decision-making process? What's the multi-generational structure when it comes to the legal structure, right? Like, what legal structures do we need to put in place to then support our values and our purpose and our mission, right? So a lot of the times, one legal structure for one family won't work well for another family, and it needs to be designed. And what I've seen over the years is, unfortunately, most attorneys use a cookie cutter approach, and they kind of just draft it, change the names, produce the document. But if we're really creating a legacy, every legacy is different. The same way every fingerprint's different. You know, when I challenge you, when you go home tonight, you sit around your table, God willing, with your family. I challenge you to look at each person that's in your family, because each one of them are different, and to recognize who they are. Because how I know they're different is every one of us have a different fingerprint. Not one person has the same fingerprint. It's the same thing when we're working with families. It's the same thing when we're working with clients. They're all different, and we can't just cookie cutter them. You can't, when we're designing an insurance contract, everyone's different for every single client because their needs are different. Some of them need custom tailored life insurance contracts. Some of them need just a generic 20 pay. Their plannings has different requirements. So does their structures need to have different structures. Dan, I don't know if you want to share on that.
Well, I wanted to touch on structure because, again, I think it's important to emphasize when putting a structure together, the need to identify legacy assets from non-legacy assets. And what I mean by that is, which are the assets that embody purpose or embody greater meaning, or which could be a company or other things. And then also within legacy, to the point we've been making, distinguishing between maybe what is a family legacy asset versus an individual legacy asset. Family legacy to me is something that not everyone appreciates. I mean, not everyone wants a sort of a family legacy like a Rockefeller or something like that, and it's more about the individuals. But so identifying that, because those structures, how you manage and how you govern around legacy assets, most likely should be different than how you manage non-legacy assets, because you're protecting not just the assets itself in terms of preservation of property or financial, but it is preserving that purpose. And that's critical, because that drives that asset. That is the foundation for that asset's success, is the underlying purpose. And that's why it's a legacy asset.
Yeah, that's good. And like, even as you're talking, Dan, about the structures, I think these structures need to also reinforce positive behaviors. A lot of the time in planning, I had my first experience with a very interesting planning technique when I was young, and I'll share it in a moment. But the planning structure needs to reinforce these behaviors that we want to see in the next generation. And my first experience was this: is I was 17 years old, right? And I was working at a vitamin stand. I don't even think they're in business anymore, but it used to be like a kiosk where you would come up and you'd ask the person, you share about what you're looking to accomplish, and then they would show you what's needed, right? So I was working there, and I had a gentleman come up to me who said that, are we hiring? And I said, I believe so. He said, okay. So he said, is it part-time or full-time? I said, I'm not sure. I'll ask the manager, right? So I asked the manager, and I let them know there was a part-time that we were looking to hire for. And he said to me, oh, okay, forget about that. I said, okay, why? And then he proceeded to tell me this. He said, you see that guy over there? I said, yeah. He said, well, that guy just needs a job so he can get access to his family's money that was put in a trust. That was my first encounter with an incentive trust. 17 years old. And point being is, it sounded really good from a legal structure standpoint, but this guy was just getting anything. I mean, I was working at this store that I was making, minimum wage at in high school, just, and he's willing to take any job. And I'm not saying it's derogatory. I'm just saying he was willing to take any job just to get access to the family trust. Well, was that a positive behavior reinforcement, or was that maybe kind of just perpetuating more of the same habits, but figuring out how just to get access to that trust? So I think a lot of these trust agreements and structures need to really and reinforce positive behaviors to help them
Mm.
grow, exceed, and walk in their purpose, walk in their calling, walk in their fulfilling what they were designed to fulfill. And in that scenario, like I said, 17 years old, I experienced something at a very young age, was like, wow, as I work with clients, I want to make sure that that doesn't happen, that they're just taking anything just to get access to the money and the trust.
Yeah, it's counterproductive, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting because it raises, I cringe a lot of the times when I see what you're calling an incentive trust, because they tend to be rigid and they tend to be based on, the person's values who's creating it, right? Creating that
Mhm.
trust. And to me, those types of restrictions, or I should say that, the values of the individual creating the trust, if they're putting those into the trust, well,
Mhm.
that's more of a personal legacy trust, right? Because it's a reflection of who they are
Mhm.
from a values perspective. Whereas if the point is to um, propel the next generation, well, it actually needs to be less rigid, because it has to be about the cultivation of their greatest potential, which may be achieved in different ways, which is where you get into what really gets complicated is the skills of the advisors that are necessary, right? Because
Yeah.
now you get to a point where when you're dealing with next generation, the advisors need to understand themselves how to cultivate the talent of the next generation. And I don't know that I've encountered in my 20 years a trustee who is really good at that.
Yeah.
We tend to put professionals that are financially savvy, legally savvy, etc., into these positions of trustees, and they have very little understanding about the human, right? It's like the emotional IQ or whatever they call it, right? It's like they don't really This is part of the shift that I think is part of a bigger conversation we're trying to have. Is when
Yep.
it comes to legacy planning, our skill sets need to evolve as well, because it's about human fulfillment, not
Absolutely.
about asset growth. And that's a whole different mindset, right? The asset is just a tool. And I credit the wealth management industry for being a little ahead of the game, I think, in terms of, certainly beyond the lawyers, because they talk about goals oriented investing. They talk about using financial assets as a tool to achieve something.
Correct.
More often than not, that end goal, for a lot of clients tends to sort of be material, right? It's things like retirement and homes and things like that. But at least it's a start. And then we need to start identifying, really, this is about happiness and human fulfillment. And how do we cultivate that? And not only how do we cultivate that, how do we build that into a legal structure so that it is necessarily part of, right, the plan going forward? When I'm not around, how do I ensure that that cultivation continues? And that's a combination of what the documents say and who the advisors are, and all of that.
And I think there's a part to that that is a development of that family unit and
Mm-hmm.
each individual person within the family unit. So, like as an example, you
100%.
most people, and this is where I always see it fall apart. Most people want they have uphill dreams with downhill habits,
I like that.
right? Most
Yeah.
families that are trying to create a legacy plan have uphill hopes and dreams
Yeah.
with downhill planning strategies, because they want the answer so quickly, not realizing that a legacy is built a day at a time. It's
Yeah.
not built in a day.
Well, that raises a great point, Chad. From the mindset perspective, one of the hardest pills to swallow when it comes to effective legacy planning is communicating to the client that this is hard work.
Hard.
This is a life commitment. And P.S., what is more important, really, right? If you do it, I mean, this really should be the most important thing. So it should justify the hard work. And I want to come back to, communication. When you talk about building that family identity, and communication being so critical, it's not just, communication in terms of the comfort and dialogue amongst family members, but also what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And this comes back again, a lot of clients will hesitate or bring up the example of talking about money. And I don't want to say, we've got $1 billion business. How do you tell, a 17-year-old that we're worth $1 billion? Well, you don't, and you don't have to, because how much the company is worth is the least important aspect of the company. So when it comes to conversation and communication, start talking about why you built the company. Start talking about what that company means, the purpose that it's serving, and all, and create that value-based communication first. And that's going to alleviate a lot of the problems. But again, that is a shift
100%.
culturally, right? Because right now, I think, society-wise, we're guilty of valuing things based on dollars. And so part of this is why we're calling this a movement, because there's a lot of work to be done, and we need to start changing the norms of what we talk about, how we talk about it, et cetera. This is why we want to do it as a collective, because if all of the professionals are talking to clients this way, well, then it becomes, a little bit more part of the everyday.
Yeah, and I want to share this, and anyone who has a question, you could raise your hand. We have a couple of minutes if you do want to ask a question. But I would encourage the advisors that are on today's conversation, and also on our YouTube channel, share this with other advisors. Bring them into your office once, obviously do it COVID safe, but bring them into your office or after COVID, or do a virtual discussion and watch the video, because bringing together like-minded advisors to serve families makes it easier. A lot of the times I was sitting down with a gentleman just a couple of days ago, and I said, don't try to focus on working with the people who don't want your help. Focus with the ones that do want your help. You don't need to convince people who don't want to be convinced, but there are advisors in your community that do want to have these conversations. They want to have legacy conversations. Take this recording. The reason why we record it is not so we can market it, because we don't market it out. We record it so advisors like yourself can go on the YouTube channel, watch it with other advisors, share it with whoever they want to share it with, so that you can start this conversation. And you don't need to have all the answers. All you need to do is have the courage to start the fire so that other people can jump in.
Well, that's a great point, Chad. You and I are not inventing this. I think what we found early on in our conversations is that there were other people out there across the country that were, trying to do the same thing. But the reality was it's very scattered. And, from an industry perspective, it's not the standard. And so our hope, and it's admittedly highly aspirational, is that we collect those like-minded, legacy-minded professionals, and we try to establish a new standard, right? And strength in numbers, so to speak, and influence. But we're out there, right? The people are trying to do this, and people care, and let's bring those people together. So if you know anybody that thinks this way, bring them into the conversation. And Chad, I don't want to volunteer your time, but I think we're both pretty happy to get on the phone or individual Zoom meetings to talk about this and create strategic partnerships with other professionals to really try to grow this.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I know this is that this was not easy. 11 years ago, when I first started integrating this, and my wife and I into our practice, it was not easy. It was very confusing. But I found a person or two that were doing it well. I asked them for their time, and then they shared with me a little bit, and then I built a little bit more, and I went back and I tweaked it and changed it. And I think I'll be doing that the rest of my career, because I just believe in growing every day. But you don't have to do this alone. Reach out to us. We're more than happy to share whatever we've learned, because other people have done that with us. Share this video, bring people around, bring other advisors, other accountants, attorneys, wealth managers around your conference room table, and just hear these conversations and say, well, what are your thoughts on that? And how would you handle that? Do you think that was accurate? But now you're starting to have conversations, and that's one of the 3 areas that Dan had spoken with earlier: community, We have a community, the people that are showing up every month. Conversation, we are having conversations. Collaboration is where the action meets, it's where we go from good intentions to intentionally good. Put some advisors in your conference room or on a virtual room in a Zoom, and then play this video and discuss it and see what happens. You'll start seeing some change. You'll start seeing some advisors saying, I want to do that with you. And I just hope that that there's a fire that sparks in some of us that says, I'm going to do it. But in wrapping, it's 12:55. I want to thank you for your time. I know that we all everything's competing for our time, so you to spend it with us we tremendously appreciate it and value it. And our next one, our next legacy project conversation is on December 9th. So it's December 9th is the next one at 12 o'clock. Invite other advisors, invite them, have them just join, the series, and they can put their information. I think it's first name, last name, email, and they'll just get the reminders. But we are grateful to be spending time with you today. And if there's anything we can do, just want to be of service to you. So reach out to us. And I don't think, Danielle, is there any questions or comments that we need to address before we hop off?
No, there's not, but this was a great conversation, and I agree. And what Dan said before too about, our time, and we're open to have any conversation. We're here, all of us here, Dan, myself, and Chad are passionate about this and eager to share whatever we can with you guys.
Yep. Well, thank you guys. God bless you guys. Happy Thanksgiving. Be safe. And we'll see you on the next Legacy Project conversation. Bye-bye.
Looking forward to it.